Welcome everyone to our meeting of the Planning and Development Committee for February 11th, 2019. I remind everyone at today's meeting to please ensure all cell phones and electronic devices are turned off or placed on non-audible mode during the meeting. Council members are reminded to please refrain from sending texts and emails during the meeting. Thank you. Members of committee, there has been some changes since its publication, and I'll hand that over to the city clerk to walk us through those changes.
Mr. Chair and members of committee, members of the public, these are the changes to this evening's agenda. There was some information that was received after the agenda was published last Friday in regard to item 6.1, a presentation from planning regarding an update on the use of a development permit system in the downtown as a tool to implement a planning vision and help expedite development. There is a delegation now identified as 5.1 from Angela Battison and the Maine Thomas Development Group. So that'll be delegation 5.1 on this evening's agenda. As well, in regard to item 4.1, which is the statutory public notice item on this evening's agenda regarding city-initiated draft official plan amendment to the Credit Valley Secondary Plan, Area 45, implementing the Springbrook Tertiary Plan. There are 4 pieces of correspondence. First from A.M. Caniff Group of Companies, dated February 27th. Carl Brawley, Glenn Schnarr and Associates, dated February 28th. Ryan Mino Lehan, KLM Planning Partners, on behalf of Copper Trail Estates Incorporated, dated March 4th. And Ryan Mino Lehan, KLM Planning Partners, on behalf of Denford Estates, dated March 4th. And those are the changes, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, City Clerk. Members of committee, are there any changes or deletions to the agenda? May I have a motion to approve the agenda for today's meeting? Moved by Councillor Bowman. All in favor? Carried. Do any members have declaration of pecuniary interest under the Municipal Conflict of Interest Act for any matter to be considered on today's agenda? Note. The clerk will so note for the meeting minutes. Consent agenda. The items listed with an asterisk on the agenda are considered to be routine and non-controversial. The consent motion is to adopt the matter on today's agenda without the need for separate discussion on the item unless a member requests a separate discussion. Does any member wish to add or remove an item from consent on the agenda? No. May I have a motion to approve the agenda for today's meeting? Moved by Councillor Williams. All in favor? Carried. Thank you. That carries. So we move on to our first item today, the public meeting. So just a reminder to those in council chambers, this is a public meeting of the Planning and Development Committee held in accordance with the requirements of the Planning Act of Ontario. The proposals to be heard at this public meeting are the result of applications made under the Planning Act. These are not proposals of the City of Brampton unless they are specifically identified as city-initiated proposals. This evening, we do have one proposal, item 4.1, that is a city-initiated proposal. The intent of this public meeting is to hear submissions from the applicant and public regarding these proposals. Members of the committee may ask questions for clarification, but will not engage in debate on the proposal at this time. Committee consideration of the proposal will occur at the future meeting when planning staff bring forward the final recommendation on each proposal. The city has also posted on its website, brampton.ca, supporting information documentation from all these current development applications for public review and reference. We will now proceed to consider this item on this evening's statutory public meeting agenda. So I believe staff will, is there...
Through your chair, we've got Bobby Gauthier from WSP Canada presenting on behalf of the city.
Okay, great. Thank you and welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So good evening, everyone, and good evening, members of the committee. My name is, as noted, Bobby Gauthier. I am Senior Project Manager with WSP, and we are the firm retained by the City of Brampton to complete the Springbrook Tertiary Plan process. So I have a fairly brief presentation, about 5 or 6 minutes long, and the intent of it is to introduce the draft tertiary plan. And after I finish presenting, City staff, Claudia Larota, will be presenting on the proposed official plan amendment itself. Okay, so the purpose of the overall project is to prepare a draft tertiary plan as well as secondary plan policies to guide development within the lands known as the Springbrook Settlement Area. So the Springbrook Settlement Area is an historic hamlet in the community, and as you'll see in my presentation, there are a number of opportunities for development to occur within the area. And this is really about setting policy guidance so that when the city does receive applications for development in the study area, and indeed the city has received a few applications already, that the city will have the guidance it needs to assess those applications in terms of things like land use. You know, what kinds of land uses are appropriate in the Springbrook Settlement Area? What kinds of urban design and built form requirements are desirable? And road access, connectivity, what kind of a road network is suitable in the Springbrook Settlement Area? So the intent of this plan is to give that guidance so that when the city does receive applications, it will have that guidance to assess those applications. So the Springbrook Settlement Area is located, of course, in the vicinity of Credit View and Queen Street West in the southwest corner of the city of Brampton. I'll note quickly also that the area is within the Credit Valley Secondary Plan. However, although it is subject to the Credit Valley Secondary Plan, the Secondary Plan currently has very limited policy guidance around development in this specific community. So this study is about fulfilling that sort of gap in policy guidance to assess development applications. So here's an air photo of the study area and the delineation of the study area. I'll point out just, I guess, a few things about the study area. You can see centered around Credit View and Queen Street, there's a historic hamlet area. You know, there's an established built form of residential uses fronting onto Queen Street as well as fronting onto Credit View, which is Heritage Road. But you can also see from the air photo that there are a number of development opportunities. There's a number of vacant lands that could be developed, and certainly the city has received a lot of interest in developing those lands from private landowners. And also looking at the air photo, you can see that there's a number of natural heritage features that need to be protected. And this tertiary plan will give some guidance about what those features are and how they can be protected when development comes forward. A little bit of background about the study. So it was initiated a little bit over 10 years ago. So back in 2007, the city initiated the study, culminating in what was called the Phase 2 Summary Report. And at the time, that included quite a bit of consultation, quite a bit of work around identifying potential land use options for the study area. However, the study was paused due to a couple of things. First was the widening of Queen Street, which back in 2007, the region was looking at widening Queen Street up to 6 lanes. But now, as you know, it's being constructed to 4 lanes. And there's also, as noted, a species at risk in the study area, the presence of red-side dace. But now that those things have been resolved, the city is eager to move forward with completing the tertiary plan, in particular in response to the fact that the city's received development applications, and so there's a need to have that policy guidance to assess those applications. There's also been a couple of minor variance applications to address certain permitted uses, as well as a couple of custom homes that were constructed in the study area. The point of this map is to just provide a visual indication of the kinds of interest that the city's received in terms of development applications. So you can see the yellow-orangey polygons that you see on the map represent active development applications. There's a few of them. There's a few areas in blue and in red where the city's received and where landowners have expressed some development interest in those lands as well. So the main point of the slide is to just clearly indicate that the city is receiving a lot of imminent development interest in the study area, so that there is really an urgent need to move forward to complete the tertiary plan and the secondary plan policies. In terms of the process and deliverables that have been completed since the project was initiated in 2017. So the city retained my firm, WSP, to complete the project in late 2017, and we got underway immediately and developed a draft tertiary plan. There's a lot of background information, like I said, conducted back in 2007, as well as some other work conducted by the city in 2013. There's a good basis for us to go and prepare a draft tertiary plan, which we did at the start of 2018. Following that, we had a public open house. I know there are a lot of people in the room that I've seen at the public open house. We had that in March of 2018 to present the draft tertiary plan. And then after that, we proceeded to finalize the plan on the basis of a number of things. Landowner comments, public comments, as well as further discussions that WSP had with city staff, with the region, with Credit Valley Conservation. And then early this year, the report authored by my firm, as well as the tertiary plan, was presented to the Planning Development Committee on the agenda in January. And today is the statutory public meeting to present the secondary plan amendment, and also to provide a more formal presentation of that tertiary plan. So I'll walk quickly through the elements of the tertiary plan to provide a bit of a picture of what it looks like. So the first point and the first element of it is the mixed-use core that you see centered around Credit View and Queen Street West. So that's the purple-blue area. The intent of that area is to accommodate 2 to 3 story buildings, mixed-use buildings, ground floor commercial with potentially offices or residential uses above, and buildings that principally address the Queen Street frontage. You can see the brown area on either side of Queen Street, west of Credit View. That's the Hamlet residential area. And the intent of that designation is to provide a fairly flexible framework, because the city has been receiving some interest for commercial uses and that sort of thing. But that could consist of a range of different residential uses, townhouses, live-work uses, as well as small-scale commercial uses. And then the other remaining yellow areas would relate to residential uses. The darker yellow would be townhouses, semis, and singles, a more flexible range. And the light yellow would represent singles and semi-detached uses. And there's a number of other elements on the tertiary plan. There's a conceptual road network that we've identified through discussions with the region. There are some thoughts about the natural heritage features that need to be protected, namely there is a significant woodlot identified in the westerly portion of the study area, as well as the Springbrook Creek West tributary, which kind of bisects the study area. And so the tertiary plan provides some guidance on those things. And then my final slide, just to sum up some of the key principles about the tertiary plan. Number one is about maintaining the identity of the hamlet, ensuring that uses are going to follow the historic development pattern of having buildings that address Queen Street, address Credit View. This is about hamlet character and a hamlet scale. So the scale of buildings being proposed, the scale of development that would be supported by the tertiary plan would be in the order of 2 to 3 stories. This is also an important exercise for ensuring that development opportunity is going to be optimized, that lands are going to be efficiently utilized, and that the road network is going to be logical and provide access to all the different development opportunities throughout the study area. That's a very key function of the tertiary plan, is setting out that road network to ensure that development opportunity is optimized. The tertiary plan also has some ideas and conceptual trail opportunities, as well as a parkette. And I would note also that there are many technical matters that would have to be confirmed through development application review. So the tertiary plan provides guidance for development, but if a landowner does want to develop their property, they would need to submit an application and complete technical studies like an environmental impact study to confirm the extent of features that need to be protected, as well as looking at a traffic impact study, confirming servicing, and those kinds of things. So, Mr. Chair, that wraps up my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now at this time, we're going to invite any interested persons who would like, oh, my apologies. Yes, so we have now our city staff.
Yes, good evening, members of committee, members of the public. My name is Claudia Lurota, and I'm the policy planner that has been working with WSP on the Springbrook report. So I will try not to repeat everything that Bobby has mentioned. I just want to present the actual amendments that are being proposed as part of the Springbrook report. We're proposing amendments to the Credit Valley Secondary Plan to implement a tertiary plan and site-specific policies for the Springbrook area. As Bobby mentioned, Springbrook is located at the intersection of Queen Street and Credit View Road. And the process to date, in January of 2008, we posted a notice in the Brampton Guardian, and we mailed the notice to the landowners within the study area to let them know that the study was being reinitiated. We held an open house in March of 2018 to provide some information regarding the preliminary findings of the study and to provide an opportunity for the public to provide comments on the draft tertiary plan. The notice of the public meeting that is being presented today was posted on the Brampton Guardian on February 7 and was also mailed to landowners within the study area. That's the landowners within 200 meters from the study area as shown on the map. As Bobby mentioned, the intention of the official plan amendment is to introduce site-specific policies for the Springbrook area. The Credit Valley does have policies for Springbrook, but they're not very detailed, and at this point they don't provide the necessary guidance to evaluate proposals within the area. So it is the intention to include the tertiary plan as part of the policies and to create site-specific designations for this specific area. The tertiary plan is proposing 4 land use designations that would apply to Springbrook. As Bobby mentioned, the purple color is right at the core of the Springbrook hamlet at the intersection of Queen and Credit View, and it's intended to provide for small-scale commercial uses with residential either above or behind. The intention is to bring the buildings as close as possible to the street and provide parking and loading areas at the rear, with a maximum height of 3 stories. The hamlet residential is fronting Queen. Also, the intention for these uses is to bring the buildings closer to the street to provide a pedestrian environment, and it could be developed with a variety of detached, semi-detached townhouses and live-work units. The low density, which is shown on the light yellow, is intended to provide a transition between the stable existing community, low-density community in Credit Valley and the rest of the hamlet area, and it's intended to be developed with detached and semi-detached units. The medium density in the darker yellow, it's intended to develop with detached, semi-detached, and townhouses at a higher density than the low. The tertiary plan also shows a conceptual road network. The intention of the tertiary plan is to limit access to both Queen and Credit View as much as possible, and to consolidate accesses between neighboring properties. At this point, we're just showing a conceptual road network. As part of the review of applications, the city will determine in consultation with the region where the actual location of the roads will be. It is also shown on the tertiary plan a conceptual natural heritage system. It is the intention of the tertiary plan to protect and conserve existing features in the area. At this point, they're only being shown as conceptual. Again, as part of any future applications in the area, the city, in consultation with the Credit Valley Conservation Authority, will determine the actual limits for those features. There's also shown a parquet in there as part of the application of, as part of the development of the medium density designation. And we're also showing conceptual stormwater management ponds. At this point, the location of those ponds is conceptual. As part of the review of the applications, the city will determine whether there's an actual need for those ponds, their location, and their actual size. The official plan amendment that we're proposing for the Credit Valley Secondary Plan is consistent with provincial policy, the provincial policy statement, the growth plan, and also conforms to the region's official plan and the city's official plan. The next steps on this proposal is to collect and review all the comments that are being submitted by the public today and as part of the circulation of the draft amendments. And it is anticipated that recommendation report will be brought forward to Planning Committee before the end of the summer with an adoption of an official plan amendment. The report that is being presented today has been posted on the city's website on the meetings tab. This presentation will also be posted shortly, but there's also a dedicated webpage, brampton.ca/springtree, where you can find all the reports that have been brought forward as part of this application. And that concludes my presentation.
Thank you. Now at this time, any interested persons, please come forward to provide public input on this proposal. First, please sign into the meeting delegation book on the table so the city can contact you regarding this proposal, including when the final staff recommendation report is presented to council. Please come forward to the podium, state your name and address for the public meeting record, and you will have 5 minutes to speak on the proposal. Yeah. Have you signed in?
I have not, no.
Okay. Well, speak now and you can sign in after.
Okay, good
State your
evening.
name and address.
My name is Daniel Zikovitz from 8905 Credit View Road. And I have a big concern around your mixed use, what we've designated as mixed use, because you've got multi-million-dollar homes. We're supposed to be on a heritage road on Credit View. So if we look at south of Queen Street and west, on the west side, it's currently residential. You've mixed it as marked use. You've got some trees that are probably marked as heritage as part of that original study. So you're telling me you could put a 3-story plaza across from multi-million-dollar homes? Doesn't make sense. Help me understand that. Do you see what I'm talking about? This purple cube, and you've got 2 houses and a lot marked as mixed use right across from multi-million-dollar homes on a heritage road. We've marked that as a commercial. So that's definitely, I'd be selling my house if that's what your plan is. And I know my neighbor too has put $200,000 of upgrades in his house. He'd be moving too if this is.
And just a reminder, we will note these comments, and staff, when they develop their report, they will take that in consideration. And we'll sure to follow up with you regarding any responses, but I'm not sure. I think staff do want to.
Yeah, it doesn't make sense. Like your frontage on Queen, I get that would be a mixed use, but once you start getting into Credit View, it doesn't make sense to me.
Yeah, through you, Mr. Chair. Actually, they're not intended to be a commercial plaza. They're small-scale commercial uses.
Yeah. But you've got up to 3 stories, so this is how you've
Yeah,
marked
but
this?
the up to 3 stories, so it would be retail at ground with potential office on the second
I didn't sign
and
up to live across
residential.
from a plaza. Not for multi, these are like $2 million homes we're talking here. You're gonna put a plaza across the street? Doesn't make sense. Doesn't make sense. Like if it was maybe a tighter community, you've got a plaza on the corner maybe, but not that deep into Credit View as well. Like you're going right in, there's like 3 or 4 houses would be right across the street. There's large spruce trees that would have to be cut down. You're gonna change the complete feel of the heritage road with there's ditches, swells. You're gonna put a plaza in there, you're gonna have to remove that, start putting in curbs.
Thank you.
Doesn't
Staff
make
will
sense.
make note of it. It's important if you just put your information so staff can ensure that we have it. Thank you very much. Hi, please come forward.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. My name is Richard Domes from Canyon Walker Domes Ltd., and we represent Fateh Development Inc., the owner of 1453 Queen Street West. Earlier this afternoon, I submitted through email correspondence to the city and the committee and council members public input in regards to the proposed tertiary plan.
Sorry. Yes.
Sorry, through you, Mr. Chair, did you submit it to the city clerk's office?
Not yet, but I have copies here, and do so in a moment.
Thank you for the clarification.
So in short, we do have some concerns. We'd like to meet further with city staff, and I have 10 copies of the letter, noting that it was a little bit of a tight cutoff line at around 4:30 for the clerk to form part of the public record. While my client is supportive of the proposed mixed-use designation along Queen Street, there are some concerns that we would like to further discuss with staff with respect to the performance development criteria and build form policies, as well as with respect to the proposed access conditions along Queen Street. As of right now, it is unclear to me whether staff is proposing no access to my client's property and only facilitating indirect access to properties from the east, which would be a problem for my clients, given the fact that they're proposing, they will ultimately be proposing a mixed-use development that will involve commercial, which typically will enjoy direct access from Queen Street. I'll leave my submissions to that for now, and if you have any questions, happy to answer. Otherwise, we look forward to meeting with staff further.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Next, please. Yes, come forward.
Good evening, Chair and committee members, councilmen, councilwomen. My name is Stanley McIntosh. I live out Fort Williams Drive, 14 Fort Williams. My concern is more of the traffic. I probably wasn't privy to the widening exercise on Mississauga Road going to Queen Street, and as you turn on right, make a right going east on Queen Street, going north to those development residential areas, I find the traffic is really overwhelming for such a brand new area. You have a lot of development that's happening, obviously north on Mississauga Road going to Sandalwood. Then you have further west, and that artery on Mississauga Road seems to be like the only artery to get you out of anywhere. My apprehension right now, it's really bad. Like I leave like 5 o'clock in the morning or 5:30, so I can avoid a lot of that. But the minute you hit rush hour, it's really, really dense. And I don't really see an alternate outlet. So my concern is that in terms of how many other more houses you put in that particular area, where the Queen Street widening exercise has kind of dragged on. It's kind of 2 years behind schedule. And even when they propose to be finished, we still have an additional widening exercise over the ravine, which I understand for safety reasons. Obviously, environmental studies would probably require it to expand the project, but I don't think within the region and obviously the city is coordinated, so the traffic is really overwhelming. So my thing is just more of pointing out who's doing the studies of the volume in the mornings. Is there any consideration taken that there's a massive development that's happening west of Mississauga Road, which leaves that Mississauga Road is the only artery? Like it takes my wife probably 20 minutes to get to work, and she's only like maybe 5 minutes away from her workplace within the particular those particular headquarters. So that's what I wanted to just leave with the committee. It's more of how do you plan the traffic volume, because living there, it's really hectic, it's really strenuous, and I find that's probably really overlooked. So that's what I would like to submit to you.
Yeah, Councillor, sorry, I think Councillor has a question.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Just to let the delegate know that currently the region is going through an EA process of Mississauga Road from around Ostrander, a little bit further north down through the valley. And so that'll identify any issues with traffic in that entire area. So we're currently looking at that intersection. It's an intersection that is a major issue, and the EA process is going to identify what changes need to be made at the regional level to make that intersection a lot more easy to move freely in and out.
When you say EA, what's the acronym stands for? Just
Environmental assessment.
Environmental assessment, okay. Is that a separate exercise from, I guess, what this conversation is tonight, or is it in part and parcel? Just trying to.
The EA process has already begun. It began a while ago. I don't know if staff want to elaborate on that, but it's through the region because it's a regional road.
Yeah. Yeah, I understand different jurisdictions, yeah, and because of,
But the city works hand in hand with the region appeal to going through that process.
okay. I'll definitely be interested to find out where they are in that stage, because I know it was supposed to be one big project, and I think they staggered it, but it wasn't communicated to the residents that we've broken up the project to address this, this part of the road. And so it's really undetermined to the residents how long is this gonna really go on, which is needed, I understand, but at least there'll be better public communication for that. And I know that's not on your level, it's more on the region, but in terms of how that dialogue goes between the two jurisdictions, that'd be really good if they could communicate that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Palacio. Into staff, just to remind, I guess the comment that part of the application, the traffic study, is part of the application, or any applications of the Church-Terry area as well. Is that correct?
Through you, Mr. Chairman. Yes, as part of any development application that we received in the area, we will require the submission of a traffic impact study.
Thank you very much. Yes.
Pardon me, Mr. Chairman. It's Michael Gagnon from GWD, Urban Planners. I first want to compliment the city on the beautiful council chamber. It's the first time I've been in here. It's absolutely spectacular compared to what was here before, so I'd like to compliment the staff who were in charge of this project. The room is absolutely beautiful, so we have the benefit of presenting across the whole of the GTA and other parts of the province. And I'll tell you, this room is one of the nicest I've ever been into now, so congratulations. Money well spent, and the time it took, about a year, was well worth it. It's a beautiful space, so you're to be congratulated. I'm here this evening on behalf of Gurpreet Gill. He's the owner of 9058 Creditview Road in Brampton. And Councillor Palacio will know, when his father was a councillor years ago when I first started, that when I used to come to planning committee meetings, I would submit volumes like this. And it was always a running joke about how much material I would file. But I'm starting to think today I've got to go buy a lottery ticket, because I'd like to also compliment Claudia and the consultant, Robert, on the work that they did. The letter I submitted, and you all received a copy in January, was just a wee little thing like this, but it was full of accolades for staff, because I don't know if the stars are aligning, but a couple of things have just seemed to be falling into place since the election, and including a very positive report and a very good job by the sub-consultants you retained. We did make multiple submissions. In fact, in this document here, there are 4 separate letters we filed to your staff, and they were patient in receiving all of them. And the consultant, I met him at the open house meeting, but in presenting this evening, I have nothing but compliments for staff. The land use plan is very well thought out. The road pattern is practical, it's rational, it's fair, and it's equitable. Our client, and I don't have a pointer, but we're on the west side of Creditview Road, near the top end where, is this a little, okay. I can't seem to see the dot, not working. But we are on Creditview Road on the west side. At the top end of the plan, there's a street called Hosta, and you can see it. There's an extension of it coming south, and it's ending in a cul-de-sac, and then there's a east-west leg that goes out to Creditview Road. Our client is just the, I guess, the 4th property down, and we are proposing to file an application in the next 3 months to develop it for 5 residential lots, consistent with the staff plan and the WSP report. You may or may not be aware that there is an appeal that was filed by our neighbor to the north. And just last week, our client has now retained legal counsel to get party status at that hearing, and we will be going to support city staff in the work that you've done here, because we think that it's a very good plan. I'm not sure why they filed their appeal. It might have been a delay in the process because it's been a long time in coming. But we're hoping that the applicant will work cooperatively with the city and ourselves so we can settle the matter and not have to go through a long, torturous appeal. But that being said, we're going to be there supporting your staff, and hopefully through the rest of this process, you too will endorse what your staff have done. I'm not going to go through the details of the letter. You have it, and I just want to compliment the staff again that did a very good job. And Claudia has been very patient because our office is tenacious in following up. She's always pleasant and has been more than accommodating in responding to our requests for information, and it's been a wonderful process. And like I said, not often, as you know, those who've been around for a while, that we come here saying staff have done it perfect. They did it perfect tonight, and hopefully you'll all endorse that going through the rest of the process. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Please. Yeah.
Hello, my name is Sylvia Roberts. I'm a resident of Ward 3. I know one of the residents here is concerned about plazas. From what I gather, that's not what you're intending. Is it going to be more like the historic buildings in downtown that are 3 stories and have typically commercial on the bottom and then office space and residential above? Is that what's intended by 3-story live-work stuff?
Through you, Mr. Chair, yeah, something similar to that.
Okay.
It's not an actual plaza, commercial plaza.
For styles, is there going to be any rules in particular on that? Because if you have styles like that, but then you allow someone to put down a brutalist architectural style building, it is going to make the whole appearance of it, any kind of heritage, just completely fall apart. Europe is running into that frequently, where you'll have one building of that kind of style and it will ruin an entire street in terms of appearance. So will there be any steps taken so that architectural styles are like that?
Through you, Mr. Chair. At this point, urban design guidelines are not being proposed as part of the secondary plan, but as part of any application that is being submitted, a design brief will be required. So we will be reviewing the architectural styles being proposed.
Would the mixed use densities actually allow something like downtown Brampton? Because historical styles for hamlets, a lot of people think it's like houses on farms out, but what you typically have is you actually have something like downtown, the old buildings of downtown Brampton, where even if there was 1,000 people, you would still see 3-story buildings like that, where the buildings are literally touching.
Through you, Mr. Chair. Yes, the intention is to maintain the character of the hamlet, so something similar to heritage.
No, but I mean, will the densities permitted by the bylaws actually allow you to have something that would match historical norms for British or Irish styles of development?
So, I don't know.
So it's, our rules now are mostly geared towards single-family development and cars, and because of how that is, it makes it almost impossible to actually develop something historically appropriate, so anything that would remotely develop a hamlet other than some facade, but you really have no structure behind it, and so when you actually visit it, it's dead.
Well, the secondary plan doesn't get at that much detail. That's something that will be part of our rezoning application. So at this point, the policies in the secondary plan are very general. The intention is to allow for that type of mixed development, but it doesn't get into the details of the actual building.
Okay.
Great. Thank you. So at this time, are there anyone else that would like to come? Questions or clarification? Okay. Thank you. And at this time, I will open up to members of committee if there are any questions you have of city staff. For clarification, Councillor Haleshi.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I realize that we didn't get a lot of the slides in our information. One of the slides that was put up showed some of the highlighted areas, some that were in inactive or active current files. And I was just wondering how up to date that slide is. Just, yep, that one.
Through you, Mr. Chair, that slide is probably about 6 to 8 months old.
6 to 8 months old? Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Haleshi. guess if there's not, then I guess we will, okay, thank you. So we will need a motion to receive staff report, the presentation, and the 5 pieces of correspondence. Moved by Councillor Fortini. All in favor? Carried. Thank you very much. We move on to now item 6.1, presentation from David Vanderberg, Central Area Planner, Planning and Development Services, regarding the use of a development permit system in the downtown core as a tool to implement a planning vision and help expedite development. I'll just ask you to wait a couple minutes so people can leave the chambers. They said to the end. Okay, please go. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Good evening, Chairman, new members and members of the public. My name is David Vanderberg, and I'm Central Area Planner with the city. And in my presentation, I will be providing information on Brampton's experience with development permit systems. The first question then is, what is a development permit system? The development permit system, often shortened to DPS, is an optional land use planning tool that the province introduced in 2002. It can also be called a community planning permit system. Typically, land use is regulated through a zoning bylaw that sets out what uses are permitted and what types of buildings can be constructed on a property. Then someone looking to actually build on the property would have to submit a site plan application where the city reviews the details of the development proposal. The development permit system is an alternative way to regulate land use. It replaces the zoning bylaw. The DPS is then what sets the rules for what can be built on a property and how property can be used. Development in the DPS area would also not go through a site plan process, but instead go through a development permit process. Under a DPS, approval of variances can also be delegated to staff, rather than going through the committee of adjustment process that under a conventional zoning approach they would go through. So what you end up with is zoning, site plan, and minor variances all being combined into one streamlined approval process. Development permit systems provide a number of benefits compared to the conventional zoning bylaw approach. First, policies, regulations, and design guidelines can be combined into one document to clearly define how you want an area to develop. Second, typically a DPS bylaw would establish as of right permissions for the type of development that a city ultimately wants to see in an area. This streamlines the approval process and helps expedite development. For example, you'd go from having 2 application processes, a zoning bylaw amendment and a site plan application, to commonly just one, a development permit application. I would note that it is possible to have a private application to amend a DPS bylaw like you would have with the zoning bylaw, but this would be expected to happen much less often. Public participation and the appeal process are also focused at the front end of the process when the DPS bylaw itself is created. Only the applicant is permitted to appeal a decision on the development permit, which reduces the risk for someone proposing development and again helps to streamline the approval process. The fourth benefit I would mention is that DPS it gives more options for regulating development. For example, you can regulate things like changes of use that may be difficult to do under a zoning bylaw. Another example is you can have discretionary uses. This means that a use is only permitted on a property if certain criteria are met. In an intensification area, for example, you could only permit a high-density development if satisfactory studies are provided to examine the impact of that use, and then you can impose conditions of approval on the development permit to reduce those impacts. So now I'll be discussing Brampton's experience with DPS bylaws. The city has a development permit system bylaw in place for the Main Street North area. So this is the area of Main Street to the north of the downtown, generally from Church Street to Vauden, which is shown in the attached graphic on the slide. Council approved the bylaw in 2012. It was appealed to the OMB, and then its final decision on it was made in 2015. Many of you will know the area well, and it is an area with a significant number of heritage resources. But it's also an area that, being within the city's urban growth center, where we want to see redevelopment. The DPS was considered the best tool to achieve the goal of encouraging redevelopment while protecting the heritage character of the area. When establishing the Main Street North Street DPS, it was set up to allow expansion of the DPS in the future. The official plan policies were established for it, the overall bylaw is in place, and new areas can be simply added as new chapters to that bylaw. As a note on things that Planning Committee will be seeing in the future, the Main Street North DPS was originally intended to include lands on the west side of Main Street between Church and Market Streets, so on the southwest end of the DPS area. While the city was working on the DPS bylaw, we were also at the same time working on an update to the special policy area in the downtown for the Etobicoke Creek floodplain. This block was affected by both projects, and the province had advised at that time we should therefore leave it out of the DPS. However, part of the work on the floodplain SBA was to update the mapping for the floodplain, and this work removed this area from the floodplain, so it's not within the floodplain, and removes that barrier to including it as part of the DPS. And the intent is that planning staff will be working on bringing these lands into the DPS as was originally intended. So as I noted, one of the features of a DPS is that there's limited appeal rights. This is a policy first document. And therefore, it's very important to first establish a shared vision for the area that incorporates a significant amount of public input. For the Main Street North DPS, the first part of the project was a visioning study, which Council approved in 2009. It established a number of key objectives for the area. These included retaining the area's heritage character, supporting a range of mixed land uses and appropriate redevelopment, greening the street and improving landscaping, supporting pedestrians and transit, and establishing the northern gateway to the downtown. The graphic on the slide shows generally the land use that's intended for this area. So the areas in red on either end are intended to be gateway areas where higher density development is foreseen. So these are just immediately north of the downtown core and then on Vauden and Main Street. The yellow area in the middle is identified as a historical area where there is a strong heritage character. Infill redevelopment is still desired here, but it must be done in a manner that retains the heritage character. And the orange area is a transitional area where the intended land use is mid-rise development. Once the DPS bylaw was completed, the city moved into developing the bylaw, once the visioning study was completed, the city moved on to working on the bylaw itself. The overall intent with the bylaw was that it established a clear vision for the area and then create a flexible, streamlined approval process for development that fits that vision. Some of the key features of the bylaw are it integrates policy, regulation, and design guidelines into one document so they all work together towards the same end. It allows the ultimate intended development for the area as of right, essentially pre-zoning that area. It has a tailored and streamlined approval process. Simpler applications go through a simpler review process. Approval of variances is delegated to staff, which avoids the need for separate application, and includes flexible standards intended to encourage redevelopment. For example, minimum parking requirements for most commercial uses are reduced to zero. One thing I would also add is that the DPS is just one tool that the city has in place to encourage redevelopment in this area. It is also part of the city's community improvement plan area, and there are a number of incentive programs available. For example, there are facade and building improvement grants available for conversions to existing buildings and development charge incentive program available for larger redevelopment. There is also a heritage incentive grant available for designated heritage buildings. The DPS has been in place now for just over 3 years. The applications to date have focused on conversions and improvements to existing buildings. A typical example is shown on this slide where it's a house that was converted to an office use. We have also had some initial inquiries about larger additions to buildings that would include a significant heritage restoration component. One of the challenges for fully evaluating the program is that it does cover a fairly small geographical area, and it takes time to assemble enough applications to really have a large enough sample size. However, anecdotally, I think the experience has been positive. The expanded permitted uses, flexible standards, and streamlined approval processes, especially combined with the grant programs, do make for an attractive package for people looking to open businesses in the area. The second area for which we are looking to establish a DPS bylaw is the Queen Street West area. This project was an outcome of a study examining the planned land use for the western part of the downtown secondary plan area. Generally, the area to the west of the downtown bounded by CN rail line to the north, the ORDC line to the south, and Fletcher's Creek to the west. The project was divided into 3 phases, with the first 2 being complete now. Phase 1 looked at where land use change was desired and where we wanted the existing character to remain. Phase 2 then focused on the identified change areas and looked at the preferred form of development. This work identified a new DPS as the recommended implementation method for the lands generally along Queen Street between Elizabeth Street and McLaughlin. This area is generally shown in pink on the slide, but also includes the Georgia Pacific factory site on the north side of Queen Street between McMurtry and Haggart, and the lands on the east side of the Queen-McLaughlin intersection. The current status of the project is that the visioning work is complete, and we are currently working on the final phase, which is the preparation of the DPS bylaw. The built form in this area is generally intended to be mid-rise, 4 to 6 stories in height, mixed-use development with potential for high-rise buildings at the Georgia Pacific factory site and the Queen and McLaughlin intersection. The project consultant is currently working on the DPS bylaw, and the target is to have it completed by the end of this year. For next steps, planning staff will continue to investigate the potential for the use of a DPS bylaw in other areas of the city. One of these areas that we're looking at is the Queen Street corridor between the downtown and Highway 410. We see the DPS as potentially being a really good fit in this area. First, it can effectively regulate existing interim uses. The ability to have discretionary uses may open up possibilities for streamlining the approval processes for higher density development that we ultimately see happening in this corridor, while ensuring that potential impacts are appropriately reviewed and mitigated. Planning staff is looking to advance this work in the short term, and we'll be reporting back to Planning Committee on it. Thank you, and that concludes my presentation. We'd be happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Thank you very much. Councillor Santos.
Thank you. Through you, Chair, thank you very much for your presentation. I just want to turn to the slide number. Thank you, Councillor Vicente, for helping me out. 6.1-4.
Okay.
On the Main Street North DPS, approved 2015. Just the second bullet, that DPS was considered to be the best tool to encourage redevelopment while protecting heritage character. So I get the heritage character piece because I see that the heritage character is still being maintained. What I don't get is the encourage redevelopment piece, because I haven't seen much happen there. So is there anything, you know, because this happened 3 years ago, I'm wondering if there is any redevelopment happening while also preserving the heritage character.
Well, ideally, things would go faster than what has happened. We have had a number of applications and instances where applicants have converted, say, a building to for a single detached house to a commercial use, which is one of the forms of development we want to see in this area. And I can say when we receive inquiries on it, it makes it very easy inquiries because we have the uses are generally allowed. We have the development standards are reduced as much as they really can be to encourage that development. So parking standards are down to 0. driving, things like driveway requirements, et cetera, they're all as low as possible to encourage redevelopment. And we do have incentive programs that are available for it, so we're working very hard to do it, and there has been some uptake, but obviously, ideally, it would be
I
more.
sometimes think that those two objectives, although they're in one sentence, compete with each other. So I'm wondering if that's what we're seeing on Main Street North, because, like I said, the heritage is being maintained, that's for sure. But there's nothing happening on redevelopment that I see. So maybe something's coming up, but I just wanted to ask that question. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Santos. And I think at this time, I'd like to invite the delegation. I believe Ms. Angela, or Maine Thompson Development Group.
My son is going to speak for that.
Okay, please go ahead.
I'm not Angela. Thank you.
That's fine. If you just state your name for record, please.
Absolutely. My name is Roberto Battiston. Mr. Chair, councilors, ladies and gentlemen, my name is Roberto Battiston. I represent a group of property owners located on Main Street North in Ward 1. It's very near to the GO station, the future Ryerson University campus, and Brampton's largest mobility hub. I'd like to thank David Vandenberg for his presentation and highlighting that the DPS, or the community planning system, is actually a great planning tool for achieving the Main Street North vision. At least it does have that potential. With all that hope that it brings with it, though, we have seen very little new development activities in that region, in that area, except for the few conversions that I think you just described. And the regional councillor, Santos, asked a question we often wonder about ourselves. Why is new development not taking root in that part of the city? I remember when the Main Street North development plan came to our attention in 2008, before the excitement of the Brampton 2040 vision. It's this Brampton 2040 vision, the people's vision for Brampton, where we see new thoughts and ideas on how the attraction of a university, new employment, high-density residential use, and a transit mobility hub all serve to make downtown Brampton into a vibrant and exciting and diverse community. This vision is a great opportunity now to integrate the people-centric vision of Brampton 2040 into the Main Street North vision, especially for the investment-ready land that is not in the flood zone and is adjacent to the mobility hub and the university. I believe, and we all believe, that the development investment will occur if the allocated density and zoning permission provides real value for good economic development. However, the current density allocation to this investment-ready block that I represent today, it's just not feasible from an economic perspective. That is, the current plan for this block is a mid-rise topology. To date, it has not attracted the building community in a way that brings Brampton any closer to that Brampton 2040 vision. And if it remains at this density, that vision may never be achieved. Our request today is that council direct staff to consider commencing a city-initiated amendment to the Main Street North Community Planning Bylaw and to integrate this area into the excitement of the Brampton 2040 vision. This is investment-ready land in a flood-averse area that can help support the Brampton 2040 vision and make real development happen. I trust that we all want our city to be successful. That's why we're all here today. Our hope is that council will consider this request to help speed up the much-needed development in downtown Brampton and Main Street North, and to build a vibrant, exciting, and economically successful city. Thank you for listening to our presentation and for your support of our request in advance. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Do any members have any questions of the delegation? Okay, Councillor Fortini.
Yeah, thank you through the chair. Thank you for coming. So you said about density. What's the height you have there now on the land?
9 and 7.
7 and 9 stories.
9 and 7. So when this to staff, so when this was given out, we didn't have this 240 vision and the university coming. So are they going to still be able to stay at that height, or they could actually go higher now if they bring a new application in?
So right now, the regulations are for 9 stories as the maximum height. There is an opportunity to amend the DPS bylaw. Applicants, landowners could initiate a city-initiated private application to amend it. Just by way of background, there was the 9 stories. This area was part of the area that was subject to the settlement. There were extensive discussions as part of that on the height, and this was a height that was agreed to by all parties for this property.
And that's what I'm saying. So this was already done way before the 240 vision, the university was coming in. So now that's all this in, they'll have to start the process all over again and bring a new application in, or just could do an amendment to the application they have now.
Through the chairman, it would require an amendment to the DPS bylaw to change the height to above anything greater than 9 stories.
So as we were talking, going back 2 or 3 weeks ago, see if we could do the downtown, take the bylaw out to as we're looking into unlimited height restriction, like Mississauga's on the Vaughan. Well, will this be captured under there? Is that what it is? We'll go up to that far, that property, or it stops, I think, before their property on the bridge under that?
Yes.
Through you, Mr. Chair. So what I would offer, just with the request that's coming forward from the delegation for additional height here, is that the subject area, it has some sensitivity to it, just given that the heritage designated uses that are located to the north of the area that's identified on this screen just as orange. I believe that's the area that is the subject of the request that's come forward from the delegation to increase the height and density of that orange area, essentially. So, and as stated by Mr. Vandenberg, through the OMB appeal hearing that we had and some resolution with that landowner towards what the DPS should state there, staff have had, at that point in time, a full consideration to really what the DPS should contain for the site. So granted, there have been some items that have come forward that really would warrant some recontemplation potentially, but what staff would offer is that while we could look at some additional intensity through a private initiative application that could come forward from the applicant, there are some sensitivities here with the heritage and the adjacent homes just to the west as well. And so through a private application that would come forward from the landowner, we could work with them towards contemplating those things and towards trying to have an appropriate balance between something to that effect and what the other lands really are and the transition from the site through to those areas. So really that would be the offer from staff, as far as we would invite the landowners to make a pre-consultation application to us for us to initiate some conversation about that. We can put forward some positions and have some good dialogue, and ultimately the landowner can make a full application towards amending the DPS.
Thank you. Councilor Fortini, any further comments, questions? Okay, thank you. Councilor Santos.
Thank you, through you, Chair. So you had mentioned in your presentation that you had a suggestion for staff to do something?
Yes.
Could you just clarify?
Sure. So the request is that we'd like to have the council direct staff to consider commencing a city-initiated amendment, as was mentioned, to the Main Street North Community Planning Bylaw to essentially remove the restrictions of the DPS and the height restrictions that come along with it, so that we could find more attraction from the building and development community to build a higher density residences and mixed-use property there.
Okay. So I got that, and so I'm wondering if we could refer this to staff to take a look at that, the feasibility of that.
So I guess City Clerk, if you can clarify, would that need a motion or? Okay, so I believe as expressed, we have a motion by Councilor Santos. Is that clear for staff in terms of what the direction would be? Is to look at, bring a report back, is that correct, Councilor Santos? Which looks at City of Brampton with proposed amendments to allow for more density intensification amendments to the DPS. Is that essentially?
That's essentially it. Yep.
Is that what you're moving, Councilor Santos?
Correct.
Is staff clear with the direction?
I'd like to have a little bit more dialogue through Chair, if you don't mind. Essentially, you're asking a referral back for us to report back on the feasibility, I guess, of what it would take for a city-initiated amendment. Rather than go through the exercise of preparing a report, I mean, it is feasible that the city, if council were to give direction, could initiate a city-initiated amendment to the bylaw. What we're suggesting is that the landowners have the equal opportunity to initiate that amendment. They could come into the city, apply for an amendment to the bylaw on their own accord, with proposals that would fit, I suppose, the development, the nature of development that they had hoped to bring forward, and give us the clarity to review an application for the merits of what would be proposed for the site, rather than the city going through an exercise to take another shot at proposing what might not ultimately be satisfactory to the landowner.
Mm-hmm. So I get that. My only thing is then it still is, to me it sounds like the DPS is certainly more in favor of protecting the heritage character than the redevelopment or encouraging redevelopment. And so every single time that a prospective applicant wants to redevelop their land, they have to take a further step again to apply for a rezone. Is that correct?
Through you, Chair. That's not necessarily the circumstance.
Okay.
The DPS is meant to be a tool that streamlines these approval processes. If done in a manner that satisfies, the landowner's desire to develop the property, we could be bringing applications through the city that may never have any need to make it before council for consideration, because the proposal complies with the zoning that's in place. We can process the site plan application and move forward with the approvals. The intent is that the steps are all streamlined to make the process a lot faster. So in these certain circumstances, in this particular corridor, the limitations, I guess, that were put in place, and I wasn't privy to the process when this was done back in 2009, but what was put in place then through, as Alan, I believe, mentioned, appeal processes, was a result of, back and forth between the community surrounding the Main Street North corridor, landowners that had concerns about, what a 16-story building might look like across the street from their home, and landed on what was considered to be appropriate, I guess, development restrictions or limitations for those areas. Mm-hmm. Alan, is there anything that you wanted to add?
Well, perhaps what I would add through you, Mr. Chair, is that the process that's set up with the DPS at this point in time is such that it allows, yes, the streamlined processing, as you've heard from Mr. Vanderberg, but it also allows for applications to be made by property owners who would like to deviate from that, and there's an amendment process that can be had. It's much the same in that respect to any landowner making a zoning bylaw amendment application to the city, rather than that landowner putting through to staff, asking for direction for staff to come up with a development scheme for a property that is different than what the zoning bylaw currently speaks to. So in this case, the staff has already identified what we believe to be an appropriate development scheme for the subject property, the orange area as shown, and here the request is for staff to reconsider that. We would put to council committee in this case that staff can work through that with the landowner through an application, and we could start off that process by way of our standard pre-consultation, where we can have some very quick dialogue to put through to the landowners what our concerns could be, what our appreciations could be, where we could find some middle ground, but none of that's been had to date.
Okay, so that's fine. We don't necessarily have to refer to staff at this point on the feasibility of amending the entire bylaw, but what I will signal is that it's sounding like there isn't much of a market, or the market isn't in favor of the existing zoning that's currently there in place. And so we're going to be seeing applicants coming back to speak about rezoning to accommodate the market and the economic impact on what they want to develop. That's my only concern. So every time somebody wants to redevelop, they're going to give something, then they're going to apply to change it, because again, it protects the heritage character here, but doesn't necessarily support redevelopment. That's it, thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Santos. I believe staff have a comment?
Well, just
comment?
that we are engaged in a pre-consultation on Elizabeth Street for a mid-rise proposal, and I believe there are other ones. So some people are looking at that type of development. We have mid-rise throughout the city of Brampton. So we have to be careful in terms of not seeing development on a certain property, then deciding that we have to jump to another higher level in order to attain that development, because it may not even happen at that stage. And then you get inappropriate development for another area. And that can be just as bad as, also creates its own problems. So, well, we can evaluate, as Mr. Parsons has said. I think there have been other sites in the downtown where the landowners seem to have expressed an interest in building the mid-rise style, which is welcome, because we haven't actually seen that, recently right in the core, and we hope to have materialized. So I just wanted to offer that sort of insight from what we're experiencing as well. All right.
Thank you. Okay. Councillor Santos?
Yeah, just as a follow-up,
So just as a follow-up though, so I appreciate that staff had mentioned some other developments. The issue is that I think we're talking about Main Street North DPS. Is there a DPS on Elizabeth Street North? No, okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Santos. And does the delegation want to?
Yeah, just a couple more comments. The first is, we have every intention of working with the city to maintain the heritage character of the properties that are there, to maintain the facades and the character as best we can. But as Councillor Santos mentioned, without the ability to attract the development, it will never happen, and we've spent many years and considerable money to investigate this. It's an investment on our part, we just have not been able to attract the investment. So again, we'd like to reiterate our request. The original plans came about before the discussion of a university, before the discussion of other great things that are going to make downtown Brampton great in its 2040 vision. We would like to make sure that we can develop along with it to ensure that the people have the density of housing they need, as well as the mixed-use land that make it a vibrant and diverse property.
Okay. Thank you very much. Councillor Paleshi.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. So I think everybody is starting to read between the lines a little bit. I guess what we have here is a little bit of an issue with respect to the height requirements that we've implemented, and development wanting to potentially push the envelope. But that being said, I guess my first question is, have we had any landowners come to the city as of yet that fall in this footprint requesting higher density, higher elevations on their property than what we currently allow? Like, you're asking them to go through pre-consultation, you're asking them to submit. Has anybody opened up that dialogue to staff as of yet to try and, or are they kind of set back with the fact that this policy is in place and has a height restriction?
Yeah, and through you, Mr. Chair. So staff has not heard anything formally from the landowners requesting for a change to that effect.
Okay. So I guess what, with a policy set in place of a height restriction, then that may steer some people towards not even approaching the city, because the restrictions been put in place. I understand not wanting to start the process on the amendment, but how do we kind of work with both sides of the spectrum? Because really, the case is, if we grant somebody to go outside of the restrictions, we're going to hear from surrounding landowners that don't want that height next to them, which is just like any infill site that we deal throughout the city of Brampton. But we currently have that height restriction. So we currently have that extra step. So I guess what we need to understand as a council is how do we, I guess since none of us were here in 2008, how we need to understand what that process was back then, how we got to where we are today, with strictly pertaining to the height restriction.
So through the chair, this was an appeal made by these same landowners as a group on the DPS that was before council at the time. We at the time of the initial approval, had recommended a different height on this property of 5 stories. And this application was appealed, and then we went through a settlement process with them, which they had retained a planner, and we worked through with them what would be an appropriate development arrangement for this property, which addressed, in our view, the city's concerns, and which, since they settled on it and they agreed with in the end with the bylaw that was implemented, the height range that was increased from what we supported, but was less than what they had initially come back to us with. They had concepts, and we worked through a whole series of concepts on how we could arrange for higher density on here than what we initially sought versus what we had initially sought. So we went through an extended process on that, developed some detailed guidelines around that and detailed regulations on how that could fit in with angular planes and so forth. And then when we were both in an agreeable state, we brought this back forward to, it was, a settlement, and there was an in-camera session, and council understood that was the approach that the city was going to take, and then we proceeded with a settlement hearing to the Ontario Municipal Board at the time. So.
Back in?
Well, it ended up being approved in 2014 or 15 or something like that. So it was a 3 or so year process. I mean, it wasn't continuous, but it was a lengthy process.
Okay. So then going forward, providing opportunity, where can we, other than requesting that landowners put forward a pre-con bid for change of use or change of amendment to the current DPS plan? How do we provide the opportunity for them to understand that, we're willing to work with, we're willing to look at, and this won't be the stopper in terms of moving applications forward?
Through you, Chair. I guess what we can say, I mean, this would be not much different than any other zoning amendment that we receive throughout the city. We have rules in place, virtually every property, and if it doesn't suit what the development that is proposed for the site, there's a process that you go through, a zoning bylaw amendment. The amendment to the DPS, that process is really no different. What I want to bring up is that the landowners are asking the city to initiate that process on their behalf, and I do respect and understand that there has been significant investments made by them to try to attract an opportunity to develop that site. in that possibly either the return on investment or the market isn't there at that mid-rise level. Having said that, I do have, I guess, some reservation where we are making decisions on behalf of landowners for economic viability rather than the appropriate development of the site. I recognize that we're trying to attract higher density development in the downtown core, and this could be a good opportunity for that, but we do have to balance that with the best interest of the community surrounding as well, in where there are no immediate plans to demolish a couple of blocks of houses and put up mid-rise to eventually stagger down from the high-rise. We do have to balance the interests of the surrounding community with what we hope to achieve in the downtown core. So depending on what the ask is of the landowners in terms of height, maybe there is something that's viable that we can come to an agreement with. But again, I do believe that the possibility of initiating that from the landowner's perspective is more viable than the city taking the step to initiate it. And having said that, of course, we will respect the wishes of council.
So, Mr. Chair, through you, and hopefully that's just kind of wraps this up, is I think since council is a little bit new in hearing what some of the issues may be out there, I think that, prior this council, or last council, when an issue like this came up, we really requested that the area councilors meet with the landowners and staff, and hopefully come back to council with future recommendations and information. And I think that that's appropriate in this before we refer anything back to staff to have them complete any work. I think that that's what I think we would do in this situation, and come back to future councils. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Pelletier. Councillor Fortini.
Yeah, sorry.
Oh, I think it's mixed up.
It's mixed up, yeah. Is it me or? Okay.
It's okay.
Thank you. Just a staff, you're talking about houses behind there for the height. How many homes is there? I drive by there, the site now, a lot of them are all kind of boarded up.
Through you, Mr. Chair, I'm not familiar with what houses might be boarded up at this point in time. I believe, though, the graphic as up on the screen, just being the area just immediately to the west of the orange block would be representative of what's there. But again, as to whether they're currently vacant or not, staff couldn't advise at this moment.
Just across there, there's a couple more high-rises. There's no backyards on that part, is there? Where the other high-rise, I think they're like 20 stories, 22 stories. They're just right beside them. So how come they got that height and we cannot do it to the one beside them?
Well, again, it's through the chair. I mean, it's difficult to talk about hypothetical scenarios here, but there's shadowing issues from a high rise. We don't know what form it would take, and there's a principle that was worked through on this was to develop a transition as we move north from the Church Street area along Main Street in terms of the intensity of development. I respect that whole quadrant over there is essentially stable residential areas. So it's difficult for staff to discuss, without seeing any sort of drawings or plans, what sort of potential impacts there are.
So this bylaw was 2009? So
It was approved in 15, wasn't it?
It was approved by council in 2012 and approved by the OMB in 2015.
2015. I keep saying, this is on the transit line. We got the GO station down the street. It's not Yorkville or Eglinton and Young where we can get $1,200 a square foot. When we give these zoning, 8, 9 stories, it doesn't pay the market to start developing. So I think we got to work on this. That's why I keep saying we have to do this area, certain areas downtown on limited height, because this is going to sit boarded up for many, many years. If we want development, we're always crying about houses and stuff. I think we have to work on this new bylaw. Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Fortini. Councillor Singh?
No, I didn't have a comment.
No.
Makes sense.
Okay, so if there's... Motion to receive staff presentation, moved by Councillor Bowman, all in favor, carried. To receive the delegation, moved by Councillor Santos, carried. And lastly, and I don't believe Councillor Santos has put forward the motion, so, no. Okay, thank you. And we move on to, those are on consent. Business, referred matters list, correspondences and consent. Councillor question period. Do any members have any questions of staff? Nope. Public question period. Are there any questions from the public about a recommendation made by committee at today's meeting? If so, please come forward. No. Can I get a motion to adjourn? Moved by Councillor Fortini. Just a reminder, our next committee meeting will be March 25th at 1 p.m. Motion to adjourn by Councillor Fortini. All in favor? Carried. Thank you and have a good night.